As a full-time filmmaker who is obsessed with gear, I have tried out a lot of lenses. And the RF 85mm F1.2 from Canon really sticks out from the rest. But is it really worth the $2,800 price tag? So I'm going to cover everything you need to know about this lens so you can make an informed decision to see if you should go buy it yourself. We're going to start with what's great about the lens, then we're going to cover what's not so great, and then finally I'm going to give you my opinion on who I think should buy this and who should stay away. So let's get started with what's great about this lens. And what's really great about this lens, which may not be a surprise, is its image quality. Let's start with some technical things. Because this is an L series lens, it does have special coating on the glass that helps remove some flares and remove chromatic aberrations from the image, meaning you have a much cleaner and sharper image all around. If you want to know what that's called, Canon calls it the blue spectrum refractive optics, which helps with the chromatic aberration. This lens comes with an 82mm thread size, which is pretty standard, so many of your filters should work on this lens as well. And because of the special glass that Canon uses on their L series lens, the contrast on this lens is fantastic. It has a much smoother roll off and actually can capture what I like to call micro contrast, or what people sometimes call it. And essentially it just has a much smoother and pleasing image when you're talking about the difference between light and dark. Of course, this lens can shoot to f1.2, which just simply means that the aperture is wide open, which has two effects. The first one obviously being that shallower depth of field, which basically allows you to have that creamy out of focus area behind and even in front of your subject. Second, it also allows a lot more light to come into the lens. So this is a great lens for low light situations. And the craziest part about the f1.2 is that it is still pretty darn tack sharp even when it is wide open at f1.2. And on that note, the autofocus is incredible given the fact that it is at f1.2 and it's so wide open. The tracking on the autofocus hasn't been an issue whatsoever. And since we are talking about video, there is a little bit of focus breathing I have found, but not so dramatic like something on the 28-70 scale, which is really dramatic and sometimes can be really distracting if that is something you care about. And then of course, 85mm is a very popular focal length for headshots and for shooting people because of the way it actually flattens the image and compresses the image. It is extremely flattering for some reason. It just makes faces look pleasant, and you also have a little bit of that short telephoto length, so you actually need some space between you and the subject to really capture the scene that you're looking for. And lastly, if you do have a camera with in-body image stabilization, this lens actually coordinates with that really well and is technically rated by Canon for up to 8 stops of shake correction, which is absolutely insane. Typically, this is a measure used for photos, but in video, I can tell you practically that it just means that the image stabilization is extremely smooth because of the way this lens coordinates with the in-body image stabilization. All this really adds up to an incredible image that comes out of this lens and is really cinematic and something that felt very documentary, but it's not all perfect. So let's talk about some of the drawbacks. The first and most obvious one is actually the 85mm focal length. Because this is the beginning end of telephoto, you need a lot of space to actually utilize this lens. So if you do shoot in small spaces or you're often shooting indoors, the 85mm can be a little bit tough to actually frame and accurately get the shots you need. And although this is a telephoto lens, it doesn't really work for any sort of macro capabilities because its minimum focusing distance is roughly 2.79 feet, which I'll just round up to essentially 3 feet. And if you've seen the size of this lens in person, this won't come as a surprise, but it is pretty heavy. For reference, my 28-70 f2 weighs just a little over 3 pounds, and this one's not far off. The 85mm actually weighs 2.63 pounds, meaning it can be pretty heavy to carry around all day. I think in the video world, this can also be a pro because the more weight you have on your setup, the less micro jitters really appear in your video. But I thought I'd share it as a con because I do think it can weigh in your backpack. It means that it becomes a much more tedious product to carry around and to actually shoot with if you do any sort of like mounting situations like gimbal work or maybe a shoulder mount, things like that. The heavier lens is inconvenient. And as I previously mentioned, this lens actually doesn't come with lens image stabilization. So if you do shoot with a body without in-body image stabilization, you're kind of SOL when it comes to the image stabilization capabilities of this lens. So for all my cinema rig people, this lens is not going to provide any sort of boosted image stabilization. So you're really going to want to use this on some sort of stable tripod or gimbal, something like that. The biggest con, I think, is the price tag. This is a really expensive lens, so you really need to have a lot of money or really be committed to the style that this lens offers you. So this $2,800 decision is not one to make lightly. So who do I think really should buy this lens and who should stay away? The easy answer for anyone who wants this lens is someone who actually does sort of portrait work or maybe some product work and has a lot of space to do that sort of work. 85mm provides such a beautiful image, and I do find it super flattering on people and subjects, and even sometimes in landscape, you just really need to know how to frame and use it. And if you are someone who's making money with your camera, it's a lot easier to justify buying a $2,800 lens than someone who might just be a hobbyist or doesn't really do this professionally. And of course, if you're an enthusiast who has a lot of money to throw around at their camera, then sure, the 85mm could be a decent choice if this is the focal length you like. Once again, I'm going to repeat, you're going to need a lot of space to use this lens. So if you're someone who's indoors, I don't think this is a good call. But of course, feel free to maybe even rent this lens once and make that judgment for yourself. As for anyone else who might be more of a casual, who just shoots as a hobby, I don't think the RF 85mm F1.2 is for you. I think you can really get away with a much cheaper option, which is the 85mm RF F2. That lens only has about one stop less of light when you're talking about F1.2 to F2. So you're getting very similar low light capabilities, but you're saving yourself, I think, almost over $2,000 on a lens. And honestly, for most people, I'm going to be honest here, aren't really going to notice the difference between that $500 lens versus the $2,800 lens. I think some pros can tell a difference, and once you use the lens, you'll definitely notice the difference. But for most client works or for enthusiasts / hobbyists, you're not really going to tell a difference, and it's much lighter, cheaper. You can get more thread options for it. And of course, like I said, you're going to be saving a lot of money going that route. And I'll even throw in another option here. Try to go third party. Maybe get like a Sigma or a Tamron version of an 85mm f1.4, and it'll definitely be a lot cheaper than the Canon version. And most people, once again, wouldn't tell the difference. But if you do care about that little bit of a difference, if you do have the money to afford this lens, and this is a lens that you actually use decently often, then by all means, feel free to get the Canon version. I always try to buy first party if possible, especially because you do get some benefits if you are a member. In this case, they call it Canon Professional Services. So what do you think? If you're on this video, you're most likely looking into buying this lens, or you're just a gearhead like me who likes to watch these videos, in which case, let me know your thoughts down below. Now, it doesn't matter how expensive your lens is if you don't have the proper video settings set on your camera. And that's why I created this guide here that covers exactly all the steps you need to take when shooting videos so that you can capture the best quality video possible. Thank you all for watching all the way until the end. I appreciate you more than you know, and feel free to let me know what you want to see next on this channel. I'll see you guys later. Peace.